used to think I was just a shadow. People walked past me like I wasn't even there. No good mornings, no thank you, just silence, and the sound of my mop hitting the cold floor. My name is David. For 13 years, I was a janitor. Not in some school or mall, but in one of the wealthiest skyscrapers downtown. A place where people wore suits that cost more than my entire month's pay. Where elevators smelled like money and ambition. Every night, I arrived after everyone else had. When the city's noise faded, and all you could hear were my footsteps echoing in the marble hallways. I cleaned the same offices where dreams were built, fortunes exchanged, and lives changed. But I was never part of any of it. To them, I was just the guy with the bucket. But what they didn't know is that I was watching, listening, learning, and sometimes, in the silence of the night, I'd sit in the boardroom, just for a minute, pretending I belonged there. It felt stupid, like a dream that had no business being inside someone like me, but something inside me refused to die. A whisper that said, "You were made for more." If you're still watching, maybe you felt like that too. Invisible, ignored, unseen by a world that only respects success. But let me tell you something no one ever told me back then. The world underestimates the quiet one, and it's in the silence that the loudest dreams begin to grow. One night, everything changed. I was scrubbing a coffee stain off the carpet outside conference room B when I heard them. Two men, late 30s me, talking inside. Loud, confident. They didn't even know the door was slightly open. "Look, if we get Series A funding by April, we're scaling to Southeast Asia. It's now or never. Forget that. If we pivot the app toward micro-lending in underserved markets, we'll triple retention." I had no idea what Series A meant, but I remember those words like scripture. Micro-lending, underserved markets, retention. I repeated them over and over that night, like a chant. They weren't just business terms, they were keys, clues from a world I wasn't supposed to understand. That night, I didn't finish cleaning. I went home and Googled every word. I fell into a rabbit hole of articles, videos, startup blogs. I didn't sleep, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to. That moment, that overheard conversation, lit a fire in me I didn't even know was possible. The kind of fire that burns quietly first, but never goes out. I started carrying a small notebook in my uniform. Every time I heard business talk, I'd write it down. Company names, ideas, investor tips. Things most janitors would never care about, but I wasn't like most janitors. Not anymore. You ever feel like you were in the wrong body, the wrong life? Like God accidentally placed you behind a broom when your hands were meant to build empires? That's how I felt. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I stopped accepting the life I was handed. Because even in the shadows, a spark is still a spark. From that night on, I made a decision. If I couldn't afford school, I would build my own. I turned the janitor closet into a tiny classroom. No windows, no air circulation, just shelves, bleach, and a folding chair. But in that little space, I devoured knowledge like a starving. Every break between floors, I pulled out my cracked phone, watched TED Talks on startups, listened to audiobooks on business and psychology, read PDFs on marketing, persuasion, and the habits of successful people. I remember one line that punched me in the gut. "You are not poor because you lack money. You are poor because you lack the right information." I stopped stopped resenting the rich, and started training my mind like my life depended on. Because, in many ways, it did. I wrote goals on the back of used mop receipts, sketched business ideas in the margins of old newspapers. I studied every night until my eyes burned, and still, no one noticed. The same people who walked past me without saying a word were teaching me everything they knew, without knowing it. Their discarded document, their overheard conversation, their success left breadcrumbs, and I followed every single one. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister, who thought I was wasting my life. Not the older janitor, who just wanted me to shut up and sweep faster. It was just me, and a dream that refused to die. So if you're watching this, and no one believes in you, let me be the first to say, I believe in you. Because sometimes, the world ignores the very people who are preparing to change it. And I was getting ready. It took me 11 months. 11 months of late-night studying, of collecting torn books left in meeting room, of YouTube videos downloaded on public Wi-Fi. 11 months before I dared to make my first move. I had saved up just under $200. That was all I had. My rent was overdue. My shoes were splitting at the toes. But there was this one company I had researched for, a tiny startup, launching an app in the personal finance space. They were looking for micro-investors. Minimum buy-in, $1,000. I stood in my room, holding my phone, finger hovering over the send button. My hand was shaking. Every voice in my head screamed, "Are you crazy? You're a janitor. You have bills. Who do you think you are?" But there was one voice, faint but stubborn, that whispered, "This is the beginning." And I listened to that one. I clicked send, watched the screen load, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel poor. I felt powerful. 2 weeks later, the company flopped. I had lost almost everything. I remember sitting on the steps outside the apartment that night, head in my hands, wondering if I had just destroyed my life. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes the fall is part of the flight, because something in me had shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't see money as this giant, unreachable god. I saw it as a tool, a teacher, a mirror. And now, I was ready to start again, this time smarter. Because once you take your first leap, you realize the ground was never that far away. It was 2:13 a.m. I was restocking paper towels on the 31st floor, the executive floor. The lights were usually off, but that night they were on. I peeked into the lounge and saw him, Mr. Langston, one of the oldest residents of the building. Gray suit, cane leaning against the armrest, eyes sharp like glass. A man who used to be somebody. You could feel it in his posture. I froze. We'd crossed paths before. He never spoke. But this time he looked up from his tablet and said, "You've been staying late, studying." I blinked. "Excuse me, sir?" He leaned forward. "I've seen your notebook. You write when no one's watching." I felt my face flush. I expected him to lecture me, maybe even report me, but instead he smiled and said, "What are you learning?" That one question broke something open in me. I started talking, slowly, carefully, then faster, like I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him about the failed investment, the silent years of learning, my idea for a platform that could help invisible workers build financial freedom. He didn't laugh. He didn't brush me off. He listened. Then he nodded once and said, "Come back tomorrow, same time." And just like that, I had a mentor. Mr. Langston wasn't just a retired businessman. He had once built and sold 3 major companies, and he saw in me what no one else had ever bothered to look for. He taught me the language of capital, how to pitch, how to calculate equity, how to read people, not just numbers. But more than anything, he taught me to believe that I belonged in. "You're not behind," he said once. "You were just running in the dark. Now, you've got light." That light was about to change everything. I started waking up different. Before, I dragged myself through each day like a ghost in a borrowed life. But now, I walked with purpose. Mr. Langston gave me a worn briefcase one night. Inside, it had nothing but a blank notebook and a pen. "No more scraps," he said. "If you're building an empire, write like a king." And so I did. Every free moment, we met. Me in my janitor uniform, him in his tailored gray suit. He taught me more in 3 months than I had learned in the past 3 years. Not just about business, but about people, strategy, discipline, grace. He told me that money is just a magnifier. It shows who you really are. Poor or rich, fake stays fake. Real becomes legend. I wrote that line down and underlined it twice. Meanwhile, my idea was evolving. It was no longer just a dream. It was a blueprint. A mobile platform that would allow underpaid workers, cleaners, cashiers, drivers, to receive financial education, track their savings, and gain access to micro-investments, even with $5. The name? Rise. Because that's what I wanted for all of us. Not just to survive, but to rise. We built a prototype using free tools and late nights. Mr. Langston connected me to an old friend who helped refine the pitch. And then came the day. The city's annual New Voices Pitch Night, a showcase for unheard entrepreneurs. Over 300 people applied. I was one of the 5 chosen to present. I still remember standing backstage, staring at my trembling hands. The lights, the crowd, the stage, and the little voice inside me that whispered, "You used to mop these floors. Tonight, you'll own them." I stepped onto the stage, and for a split second, everything went silent. I wasn't wearing a suit, didn't have a college degree, didn't have a co-founder or a shiny slideshow, but I had a story, and I had a truth that couldn't be ignored. I looked out at that sea of faces and said, "My name is David. I'm a janitor, but tonight, I'm here not as a cleaner, but as a builder." There was a pause, and then, silence so deep, I could hear someone swallow in the second row. I told them about Rise, how the world runs on the backs of invisible workers, but no one teaches them how to build wealth. I showed them the app, the model, the vision, but I didn't end with numbers. I ended with a name, Luis, 54, my friend. He cleans bathrooms in a hospital and sends half his pay back home. He's been working for 30 years and has no savings. Nobody's teaching people like him how to grow. Rise will. When I walked off that stage, my legs were numb. I didn't know if I crushed it or crashed it. But then a woman in a navy dress stood up and clapped. Then a man in a tan blazer. Then the whole room. I don't remember much after that. Just hands shaking mine. Cards pressed into my palm. Emails pouring in the next morning. 1 week later, I got my first angel a $50,000 seed fund. It wasn't billion, but it was the key to a door I'd been knocking on. The janitor was now a founder. But little did I know, the real fight was just beginning. Success comes at you fast, but so does pressure. Within 3 months, I had a small team, a prototype, an office the size of a closet, but it had windows. And for a man who used to clean underground parking lots, that felt like heaven. We launched the Rise beta in 5 neighborhoods. Early numbers were promising. User engagement was through the roof. People finally felt seen, but then the cracks started showing. First came the unexpected costs. Servers crashing, bugs multiplying, bank compliance issues. Then came the doubts, from investors, from my own team. You're thinking too small, Dave. You need to pivot fast, or you'll be irrelevant. Forget the mission. Focus on what sells. Some wanted to turn Rise into a loan service with high interest, the very trap we were trying to free people from. Then, betrayal. One of the new hires, who I trusted like a brother, stole our mailing list and pitched it to a competitor. He sold our roadmap. Everything we built felt like it was collapsing. And then came the offer. A major fintech firm offered to buy Rise outright. A clean exit, 7-figured. They said all the right words. You've done amazing work, Dave. Let us take it from... But I knew what they'd do. Strip it, monetize it, drain its soul. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Stared at that contract until my eyes blurred. Then I remembered Luis. I remembered my notebook in the janitor's closet. I remembered what Mr. Langston said. If your dream can be bought, it was never yours to begin with. I ripped the offer in half. My team thought I'd lost my mind, but I hadn't. I'd just found my line in the sand. If we were going to fall, we'd fall with integrity. But we didn't fall. We rose again. Because something shifted that people heard the story. Former janitors, maids, cooks, cashiers. They rallied behind us. Donations, shares, press coverage. The people we served saved us. And this time, we weren't just building an app. We were building a move. 6 months later, we stood at a crossroads. Rise had grown faster than I could have imagined. We'd passed 50,000 users. Small businesses were joining in. Community centers were requesting partnerships. Even schools wanted to integrate our financial tool. But we still weren't profitable. And investors were circling again, this time with bigger checks and bigger demands. One firm offered $10 million in exchange for majority control. On paper, it was a dream. They'd scale Rise globally, turn me into a face on magazine covers, guarantee me wealth beyond imagination. But their condition? Cut the free education module, add premium tiers, monetize the users aggressively. In other words, exploit the very people we were built to protect. I sat in front of the contract again, alone. Just me, a pen, and the echo of every floor I had ever mopped. And then, I got a call. It was Luis. He didn't know anything about the deal. He just wanted to say thank you. Said he used Rise to save his first $1,000. Said his daughter was opening her first bank account. Said he finally felt like a man with a future. That was it. That was the voice I needed. I walked into the boardroom the next morning, looked every investor in the eye, and I said, this platform isn't for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone who forgets who we're here to serve. Half of them walked out. The rest stayed and listened. A week later, we received a grant from a global nonprofit that believed in our mission. No strings, no manipulation, just fuel for the fire. We rebuilt, stronger, lean, focused, and most importantly, unshakable in purpose. Because in a world where everyone wants to buy your soul, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say no. It's been 5 years since I left the mop behind. Today, Rise operates in 19 countries. We've helped over 3 million people build savings, escape debt, and reclaim their dignity. But if you walked into our headquarters, you'd still see me sweeping the front steps every Monday morning. Not because I have to, because I want to remember, to stay grounded, to honor the man I used to be. We've hired hundreds of former janitors, drivers, dishwashers, farmhands, not out of charity, but because they are the most loyal, hardest working, most overlooked talent on this earth. And we train them, we raise them up. We remind them that the world may call you low, but God doesn't make anything unworthy. Mr. Langston passed last year. He left me his cane and a handwritten note. You built more than a business. You built a legacy. Sometimes I still hear that whisper from years ago. You were made for more. And now, I finally believe it. So if you're watching this right now, sitting in a job you hate, feeling forgotten by the world, wondering if your life mattered, let me say it clearly. You matter. You're not invisible, and your story isn't over. Because the greatest revolutions don't start on stages. They start in closets, with notebooks, with scraped knees and wild dreams. And sometimes, they start with a janitor who refused to stay small.